the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, End Insight for Star Empire Trade Talks as Milky Way offers ice cream concessions. Author Oddness and Haunted Podness.
Plus, we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of An Alliance of Equals by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller, all right now.
Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. And Jonathan, you want to introduce yourself again?
I am Baen intern Jonathan Graubard, still in one piece.
We have part one of a roundtable discussion this time by Baen author spouses on the podcast. Hey, this was really interesting and even filled with some insights. Included in the pod are Emily Butler, DJ Butler's wife, Bridget Correia, Larry Correia's wife, Dan Hoyt, Sarah Hoyt's husband, Maggie Nowakowska, Susan Matthews' wife, Mona Pinette, Brendan DuBois' wife, and Sharon Rice-Weber, David Weber's wife. Wow, what a gathering that was. Join us as the spouses dish very positively on their authorious other halves and provide insight into the creative process from some very close observation.
And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Sharon Lee and Steve Miller Liaden Universe novel, An Alliance of Equals.
Now here's the news. There's new free fiction and nonfiction at the Baen.com website. May bring some great stuff for your reading enjoyment. Tell us about the free fiction this month, Jonathan.
Well, first off is an interesting, cool, and slightly odd piece. This is Ghost Flotilla U-Boats, Embarkation by Susan R. Matthews. U-Boats unmoored from time. Captain Lax is not the happiest submersible commander when Allied attacks force him to dive far deeper than he expected to go. And when he surfaces only to find himself in a very large body of water that doesn't seem right somehow, in a time that definitely doesn't seem correct, the adventure is only beginning. Has his command ended up in the future, the past? Only time will tell.
And we also have free nonfiction available at the Baen.com website. What is the nonfiction for this month?
Now available as free nonfiction at the Baen.com front page is Character of the Female Warrior, an FAQ, by the very much real-life Air Force officers Captain Casey Ezell and Lieutenant Colonel Jen Whetstone. Powerful women, from Red Sonja to Ellen Ripley to Black Widow, with many stops in between. The figure of the female warrior in fiction has always had a strong appeal. But strong women who know how to fight aren't confined to the page of our favorite novels or the celluloid of our favorite films. Now Ezell and Whetstone discuss what it's like to serve in the military as a woman and to tackle some of the tropes of the female warrior in fiction.
Character of the Female Warrior and FAQ by Captain Casey Ezell and Lieutenant Colonel Jen Whetstone of the USAF, and Ghost Flotilla U-Boats Embarkation by Susan R. Matthews are now available at Baen.com for your reading enjoyment, and they will remain available at Baen eBooks in the free ebook collections Free Stories 2018 and Free Nonfiction 2018. So download those and happy reading. This is part one of a two-part interview. Part two will be available next time on the podcast. Want to welcome a bunch of author spouses to the Baen podcast. Hello, folks. How are you?
Hello.
Hello.
Well, we've done a spouse roundtable a couple of years ago, and it went over great, so we thought we'd do it again. And we have with us this time some veterans and also some newbies to the podcast. First of all, we have Emily Butler, who is Dave Butler's wife. DJ Butler is his writing name. And we have Bridget Correia, who is Larry Correia's wife. We have Dan Hoyt, who is Sarah A. Hoyt's husband. Of course, I mean, everybody here also has other credits, but this is the main credit that we're talking about tonight. So we have Maggie Nowakowska, who is Susan R. Matthews' wife. We have Mona Pinette. Is it Mona Pinette or Mona Pinette, Mona?
Neither. Pinette.
Pinette.
Think about Jeanette and Yvette. Same kind of thing.
She is Brendan DuBois' wife. And we have Sharon Rice-Weber, who is David Weber's wife. And welcome all. I thought, and that was basically last name alphabetical. Maybe we can start that way. And I thought I'd let each of you momentarily, we'll have to keep it short, obviously. But tell us what your origin story is, how you met, how long you've been in the throes of romance with your spouse, and perhaps we could start with Emily Butler.
All right. Dave and I have been deeply in love for 22 years. He was a Mormon missionary in Italy, and he had a colleague who was my little sister's boyfriend, but who was also a very good friend of mine, and he thought we'd be compatible, so he set us up. And that's how it happened. I flew out to Utah from a brother's wedding and sort of met him on the campus of BYU, thinking that he was a lot older than I was, not realizing he's actually quite a bit younger than I am, but it didn't seem to make a difference because after about 2 hours I was smitten. So that's our origin story. It didn't take very long to seal the deal.
And now you have kids and everything.
3 kids, so I'm pretty much in it.
Yes. All right. Well, what about you, Bridget Correia?
Larry and I met at Utah State University, and we kind of clicked, sort of like Emily. Within a week, both of us knew that we were pretty much going to get married and live happily ever after, with some bumps along the road, I was sure. And we've been together for 20 years. We have 4 kids. So I'm kind of stuck in it, too.
And you both run lots of marathons together, right? No.
Who, Larry? You're kidding, right?
Yes, I'm kidding. Yeah, but you are a runner, right? That's one of the things we learned from.
I am a very slow runner, but I am a runner.
And Larry is a sitter, painter of miniatures.
Larry is a World of Tanks. He is a World of Tanks aficionado and a tabletop gamer. And I am the oddball in the family in that I'm the only one who really doesn't delve deep into the nerd culture. I appreciate it, but my kids think that I am the biggest loser mom ever because I don't get all of their anime jokes and all of their hit point jokes.
But
so I'm the oddball.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into more of that soon. Dan, how about you and Sarah? Sarah's last name is, just judging by her accent, probably wasn't originally Hoyt, was it?
Of course not. It was Almeida. Sarah, contrary to what some people believe because her command of English is so good, she was actually raised in Portugal. She was not a military brat. She was born to Portuguese parents and raised in a village in Portugal, speaking Portuguese as her primary language. In fact, English is her third language, not even her second. French was her second language. She learned several other ones along the way, but the reason for pointing that out is she was an exchange student in Ohio the year after I graduated high school. And I was young, so when I went to college, I was just barely turning 18. My mother gave her to me as a birthday present, basically. Invited her to my birthday party, sat her down on my lap. I don't know how she managed to pull that off. We were both mortally embarrassed. And during the ensuing year, we did not date at all, really. I think we went roller skating once with other people, and that was it. And then she went home. 4 years later, she called me kind of out of the blue. We talked for 2 hours. I was very late to work. Was on my way out to work at the time. And 3 months later, I proposed on the phone. Still had not seen her in 4 years.
Good Lord.
Wow. As you can imagine, I caught a lot of flack from people that I knew who said, gee, well, maybe she looks like she's been hit by a truck at this point. And I'm like, I don't care. That's not the point. I love her.
Did she call you from? Where did she call you from?
That's a whole other story we're not going to get into quite right now. But
right.
She called from Portugal, from her brother's office. He worked for the phone company. And then over the next 3 months, during those 3 months, we talked probably a couple hours a day. She would call when she could in the middle of my workday, and I would take lunch, whatever time it happened to be, 9 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon. And I'd take lunch when she called. And everybody in the office, it was a very small office, 10 people, knew what was going on. So I went over was it March, I guess, that year for Easter to do the traditional thing and propose to her father, and who does not speak English, by the way. And I do not speak Portuguese. So as you can imagine, that was lots of fun. And then she came back with me at the end of the school year. Not with me. I had to leave her for another 3 months to finish her exams. And then she came back at the end of her year during the summer, and we got married about 9 months after she had first called me. And we've been married for almost 33 years now.
Wow, that's amazing. That sight unseen. That's like you got together online before there was such a thing as getting together online.
To a certain extent, but I mean, I had seen her 4 years earlier.
You had
when
seen
she was
her,
18.
yes.
Yeah,
and you probably remembered that sitting on the lap experience quite well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So
well, that's
and we
really...
have, of course, 2 kids. One who's about to finish his aeronautical and mechanical engineering, electrical engineering degree with minors in physics and math, and the other one in third year med school.
Well, that's
so as you can imagine, we got married very young.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first marriage for both of us.
Well, that is super cool. That's a super cool origin story. Maggie Nowakowska, how about you and Susan Matthews?
Well, Susan and I met through science fiction, Star Trek, Star Wars. I was very active in it in the 70s, and I had started writing some fan fiction, which was this is back in the day of print zines, when people were writing new episodes. It was a different kind of writing than you see a lot now online with fan fiction. We were basically treating it like a writer's group for nerds. And one of my editors, who lives in California, had been getting letters from a Lieutenant Matthews out of Germany. And she said, this woman is moving back to Seattle. Maybe you'd like to get in touch with her. She's read some of your stuff. And see if she'd like to get reacquainted with the local people. So Susan wrote me a note and said, I'm going to be back in town in November. And I wrote back to her and said, you just missed the big party, but why don't you come back, in a couple of weeks, and we'll get together with some of our friends. And that was November of 1978. And in August of 1979, we moved in together. In March of 1980, we exchanged rings. And in December of 2012, we were allowed to make it legal. So we've been together for going on 40 years.
Wow, that's wonderful. So Susan was in the military, and she got out right then and moved back to the Seattle area?
Yes, her family was living in the Seattle area. Her father had left the service. He was a colonel. And her mother's and father's plans were first to move back to Idaho, where they grew up. But her mother had fallen in love with the mountains and the water that we have out here. So they settled in Seattle. Yeah. And Susan came back, and I remember picking her up. She lived in a little garret in the University District, University of Washington. And she picked her up, brought her back to the house, got some friends together, and it hasn't stopped since.
That's great. Have you remained Spanish?
Oh, yes. I would say that my adult friendships have come out of my experience in fandom. It was a very small group back in those days. We were all the outside kids. And so everybody got to know each other pretty well. We hung out together a lot. the group we ended up having around here mostly were vets. We had, I think, every service covered. And I enjoyed fandom because these are people I could talk with. I'd been reading science fiction since I took Space Cat on Venus out of the library when I was 6. And so I'd been reading science fiction all my life. And that was what I knew to talk. I enjoyed Star Trek when it came out, and when I discovered that fans were getting together and holding fanish conventions, I got involved with that. There was a local group here called Starbase 12, and I got to meet them. And they showed me some print scenes, and I read some of it, and I said, I can do better than that. And so I started writing because my friends and I had been writing in high school, a lot of stories. So I'd been doing it, and in the 70s, I was in advertising. I was a copywriter on radio, then in advertising agencies, and basically I was supporting myself by doing business writing. And by the time I met Susan, I had just started at Boeing Space Center, which was very exciting. And eventually, Susan came to work for Boeing also. But yes, our group stayed together. Right now, after all these years, some people have died, some people have moved away. So it's a little smaller group than it was back then. And, of course, the net, made such a difference in the fanish world. Mm-hmm. So I'm slowly beginning to become more acquainted with some of the younger fans, and especially with the young women, trying to tell them, there really is a history of women in fandom. And don't let any of the boys tell you differently. Because we were putting out hundreds of print zines in the 70s and the 80s. But people listen about it.
This idea that I know. And Tony has made, my boss, Tony Weisskopf, has made a big point of this in several things she's written as well. That the history of, science fiction is not a place that's ever been unfriendly to women at all. It's been the most welcoming.
Oh, heavens no. My mother read it in the 30s. She had her docs, and she also read Doc Savage. She, of course, didn't keep any of them, so I had to pay for my own college. No first editions in the family. But yes, my mother wanted me to be the first woman on the moon. If I couldn't do that, she wanted me to be a nuclear physicist. And she got basically a writer and an artist instead, but forgave me when I went to work for space station, Space Boeing, and we started working on the IOS and space shuttle stuff, and my boss has his name on a plaque on the moon. She was happy.
You're not the only one who disappointed a mother who didn't really want to write her. So, and Mona, let me move on to Mona, who is married to Brendan DuBois, who is Brendan's was first known as a mystery writer, right? But that's not your origin story, anyway. So.
Unlike Dan, I was quite a bit older when Brendan and I met. I started out my career in business and had moved my career along and kind of left the personal side of my life to the side, so much so that my mother would occasionally ask me if, are you ever going to really meet anybody and maybe get married?
What were you doing?
Corporate world, I worked in finance, I worked in marketing, and I ended up as the chief operating officer of a medical device company before I retired. So I'd been very driven in my career. And when I was 35, I was doing consulting work for digital equipment. And at that point, we still had department secretaries. And the department administrative assistant, I should say, was this lovely woman whose daughter was married to Brendan's brother. And she asked me one day, she said, she says, you love to canoe. Would you like to meet somebody who enjoys canoeing? And I thought, what have I got to lose? So the two of us met. We went on a blind canoeing date. And we canoed up the Exeter River with his brother and sister-in-law, and we just had a marvelous time. And it was actually, I met him like at 11 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't go back home until 10:30 at night. We went out to dinner. We had it was a very long first date. And we just enjoyed spending time together. And I just got such a great charge out of it because we actually went up the Exeter River. And it feels great to me now because the Exeter River actually goes behind our house now. So the house that we live in is actually on that same river.
Oh, that's in New Hampshire?
That's in New Hampshire, right. So we've both stayed ultimately come back being close to home, to family. It's one of those things about Brendan that I really loved was he felt about family the same way I did. And the two of us liked to do things like canoeing and skiing, and so we shared a lot of outdoor activities. But we dated for so I met him at 35. We dated for about 5 years. I had the hardest time getting him to commit, but he finally did. And we've been married for almost 23 years.
Well, that's excellent.
The first night I met him, we took a walk down Hampton Beach, and he was telling me about a book he was writing, which was in his mystery line, which was the first book that came out in the Lewis Cole series. And I was just fascinated by it, and that was the first book that he ended up getting published. So I always think that's very special that first night he was telling me about what he loved, and it all came to fruition.
Yeah, that's great. So you knew him before.
Before, yeah. He'd had short stories published at that point, but he hadn't had any novels published.
Right. Seamus Award-winning short stories, probably.
Right. So it was at really at the very beginning of his writing career, and I kind of wondered what was ever going to come of this, because you do wonder, is he going to be able to really break into? It's a difficult business to be in, and I'm just so proud of him that he's been successful, not just in one genre, but now he's also in science fiction. And what was wonderful for us when that first happened is one of the things that brought us together, that kept us together, is one of our favorite Saturday night activities was watching Star Trek Next Generation. We'd sit down and plan to have dinner and watch it every Saturday night. So we both have an interest in science fiction, and it's something that's really kind of kept us together and kept us intrigued with the world.
Very cool. And I know that Brendan has told me that he secretly always was a science fiction writer at heart. So.
Oh my God, yes. And that's his true love, without a doubt. And it's just really wonderful that he's found a home in science fiction.
Yeah. Well, he's great, and you're great. So let's and Sharon Rice-Weber. Sharon, I've heard you and David's story, of course, but share it again with us. This has to do with bookstore, I believe.
Yeah, it does. I apologize for my voice. I'm trying really hard to get sick for MantaCon, so I'm a little raspy. But I was at that incarnation in my life. I was working in a bookstore as assistant manager, and I was in charge of the science fiction and fantasy section because I was the rustic geek or nerd. And this big honking guy walks in and black leather everything, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this guy up to? And he went straight back to science fiction, and so I go over and we do if you like this book, you'll like that guy, and he was like, yeah, I read that guy, and I didn't like it, so. And then he finished up with, I've written a book, and I'm like, yeah, okay, how many times have I heard that one lately, but he really had. He'd sold his first book to Baen. It hadn't been released yet, and so he kept coming into the store, and he started hanging out with my herd of friends, as we call ourselves. We did gaming and, went to the movies and read the books and hung out together, kind of like other spouses have said, and other fans of the genres. And he was a little slow. we knew each other for about 7 years before he finally figured out that maybe we were closer than just buddies and friends. We've been married 20 years this past April. We celebrated by doing our vow renewals again, and we'll be doing that again at MantaCon as the Duke and Duchess, which is kind of fun with the fan club. And I got him invited to his first convention ever. That he went to as a pro. I got him his first autograph session ever, and that was with Roger Zelazny and Lois McMaster-Bujold and Steve White, and got him invited back the next year. So I had a little something. I probably also bought his first book ever because I bought it before it was technically to go on the shelves. So
yeah, and things have worked out. You have the
20 years and
the twins and 20 years, the twin girls that you adopted from
our daughters. They were born in Cambodia. They came home at 15 months. They just they're 16 and a half. They'll be 17 in October. Our son is a miracle baby. Will be 16 in December. There's about 14 months between the girls and Michael, and there was 4 weeks and 2 days between him arriving and the girls arriving. And just to make life interesting, he was about 4 weeks early. So, you know that old thing about be careful what you pray for because you might get it. And we did as maids. So spent the first month going, why did we want to have 3 kids? So. But now they're nothing but blessings. We love them all 3. So
yeah, they're wonderful kids. So let me ask a little bit about writer working habits, and if any of you have anything specific that you have to deal with having a creative spouse. I don't know how we want to do this, but just the general idea that I want to throw out is, how do you deal with somebody who has to concentrate like that to write a book or a story? What do you do with them when they're in that state? Or is it not a problem or anything odd? Anyway, that's the question. Anybody want to take a shot at that?
You learn an awful lot about subjects you weren't necessarily interested in at first. I know a lot about U-boats now.
A lot about what?
U-boats.
U-boats? Yeah.
Yes, I know a lot about U-boats. I never thought I would.
Maggie, Susan has written a U-boat story. She's like insanely crazy about U-boats right now, right?
Yes. For me, that's basically you. Susan, I understand writing because I wrote for my career, and so the concentration isn't a problem. I know how that works. I keep the dogs away. I keep them entertained. I don't let them bark much. And the most interesting part is when Susan gets interested in something, she wants to share, which makes perfect sense. And so you learn an awful lot about stuff. You listen a lot. And listening helps the writer sort things out in her mind also. I don't ask too many questions. Much.
Mm-hmm. Let her go. Well, what about you, Emily? You also are a writer. And that's an interesting dynamic when you have 2 writers in the house, right? And Dan also is a writer.
Yeah,
a lot of you are. I don't know that the rest of you aren't. Anyway, Emily, go ahead, please.
Well, everybody's got their stuff. We're not at the point yet where we can pay all of our bills with writing, and so Dave also has his day job, and we don't have anything close to a routine. We're just sort of driven by, the kids' schedules and Dave's work, and then we both just hack out chunks of time whenever we can. And sometimes that's like at 9 o'clock at night. Sometimes that's on a lunch break. It's when you can. And I've been sort of amazed at Dave's capacity to find time and concentrate on the couch. His focus is sort of almost abnormal. He's very good at shutting other stuff out. I have to remind myself to respect his process, and he's very respectful of my process. And sometimes it's really hard when 3 kids have simultaneous needs and my husband is sitting on a couch looking at a computer, and I have to remind myself he's actually doing something that's vitally important to him. You know, he's not doing Facebook, he's creating a book. So I discipline myself, and he does the same thing, and the kids are into what he does and what I do, and they ask a lot of questions. So it would be great if we had something like, you know, at 9 o'clock we do this, and then at 10 o'clock we do that. We don't. Every single day is different. He's often on an airplane, and I'm often carpooling. So we day by day it.
Mm-hmm. Bridget, now I heard from Larry once that he started out with like this cave-like closet that had a basically concrete block wall.
It was an unfinished room in our basement, and there was no heat, there was no real light. You had an extension cord in, a power strip so that he could have a computer going and a little lamp, and he would sit in there. In the winter, he would sit with like a big puffy coat and a hat and 3 pairs of socks. And in the summer, it wasn't too bad because it was chilly. But that was his little cave. So as far as he's concerned, anything above that is just bonus. It's, you know, he doesn't have to hold himself away. And he's got kind of a nice office now, but and you know, when you talk about like the writing process, he's kind of a workaholic. So he's always working. He's got kind of a routine that he does during the day. That's just the sit-down time to write. He's always processing, and he's always thinking through whatever it is that he's, you know, story points that he's trying to change or character development. So in a way, it's the third person in our marriage. You know, we'll be sitting at dinner, and he'll get that faraway look. And I know he's, you know, chomping at the bit to talk about whatever character or plot twist, and he's trying really hard to respect it. You know, it's date night, maybe I don't want to hear about it, but it's kind of a challenge, though, because it's always there, and it's always something that's a part of our life, and it's hard sometimes not to get a little frustrated that it's supposed to be family time, and yet his attention is divided. But at the same time, he has the freedom to, during the day, occasionally just stop everything and devote all of his attention to the family. So it's kind of a weird thing, and probably similar in feeling, at least, to what Emily was saying. It's a little bit, every day is different, and every day you kind of have to carve out a new balance of, you know, responsibilities and time so that it works for today, because tomorrow might be completely different, and yesterday was completely different than today is. It gets a little weird, and it's hard to kind of talk about with other people, because unless you're living it, it's hard to understand. And I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, well, the life of the creative person just doesn't match the hours sometimes. Dan, what about you and Sarah's work habits and life habits intermeshing?
Well, I'm a programmer by trade, actually a systems architect, but I do a lot of programming as well, which is actually far more artistic than you think. It is an art form. It's not so much a set kind of science. It really is art. I've always been, as both of us are really an artistic bent. She writes, she paints, she does digital art now too as well, and she does all kinds of writing, not just fiction, but she does several columns on the internet, and she does a couple of blogs as well. And so she's pretty much always writing in some form or another. I got pulled into it years ago in self-defense. As I said, I've always had an artistic bent myself. I've played the piano since I was 8. And you'll find actually that pianists and mathematicians tend to go together. It's It's a very common combination. And we decided that we were going to have a weekly writers group. Well, Sarah did, and told me that I was going to be part of it because that's the way Sarah rolls. Since we were hosting it in our house, I really didn't have a whole lot of choice. Well, when I started listening to the critiques that people had and were giving, they started telling me, what do you do? What do you think? And I didn't have the vocabulary, so I studied until I did have the vocabulary to be able to converse intelligently. And then I started writing myself. So for her, she writes absolutely every day in some form. When we were first married and she told me that she wanted to write, I drew on my experience as an artist with piano and said, well, I know musicians play every day. That's what makes the difference between a good musician and a great musician. If you want to be a great writer, you need to write every day, I would think. So that was pretty much the goal that she gave herself, and she does that.
Do you give her notes now that you have the vocabulary, of course?
Well, we spent a lot of time talking about plots and characters and things like that. I've read several of the seminal books, like Dwight Swain's books on writing. Campbell, of course, because we write in science fiction and fantasy, and if you don't understand Campbell, you might as well write something else. And so for a long time, we spent quite a bit of time outside the time she was actively writing, talking about writing, so much so that our kids were immersed in it, to the point where we've had several awkward conversations with school teachers. For instance, our youngest son, when he was in, I guess, kindergarten or first grade, quoted Shakespeare because Sarah was in the midst of doing the Shakespeare series at the time. And as a result, we got a call from them, and they called us in there and said, why is he quoting Shakespeare? And we said, well, did he quote correctly? And she said, well, yes, but why are you making him watch Hamlet? And we're not making him watch Hamlet. He loves it. I'm sorry. That's just the way it is. So both of our kids have been steeped into it because that's what we talked about at the dinner table. That's what we talk about when we go on vacations. We did get some very good advice from Kevin J. Anderson several years ago, which was to go away and take a weekend periodically and just go write. Get a hotel and write. He used to do like Disney cruises and stuff like that to go out and write, or go off to the cabin and go hiking. But we're not that rich, so we go to hotels. Yeah. So we still do that periodically. We try to do that every couple of months. That'll probably be more often as I get back into the swing of writing again, because I haven't been writing for a while. I've just been really busy. But
yeah, and the kids are doing well now, so you will have time. Well, let me ask
they're almost out of the house.
Go ahead.
We're almost empty nesters. we're so close.
Yeah. Boy, I can't wait, but I've got years to go. So, Mona, your career is so much different than Brendan's, and presumably your life before you met was sort of a high pressure cooker kind of thing. How did that mesh together?
I think we made good compliments to each other. When we first got married, I worked from home, and I'd be very focused in my office, and he'd be very focused in his office. And we'd get together for lunch, and he'd tell me what he'd been working on. And Brendan can write more than anybody I know. He is very prolific. He literally writes, he'll work on one book in the morning, he'll work on another book in the afternoon, and he may work on short stories in the evening, or or something else, but he is always writing. There are very few days in our life together where Brendan hasn't written. And he actually, I think, suffers from withdrawal when he doesn't write. So I expected that to be something that was going to be sort of core in his life. He was an English major, but he focused on journalism. So he worked for several years when he first started out as a reporter. And I think that level of discipline, because you haven't got a choice. You have to sit down every day. You get assignments. You have to write a story. And you just got to get it out there. And he is very used to being disciplined about his writing. And so he's always writing. And there are just times I have to look at him and say, you need to put the computer down now. We need to sit and talk about something, or you need to stop for a little bit so that we can spend some family time. So every so often I've got to pull him away just a little bit just to make sure that he's got some balance. But that's really the single biggest issue. Like Dan, over time, he very early on had me being his first reader. And at the very beginning, I did very light copy editing because I was very concerned about affecting his stories. And as time has gone on, I've gotten much more involved in editing what he produces. He writes wonderful women, but every so often there'll be dialogue and I'll just look at him and say, she wouldn't say that. Just wouldn't happen. And those are the kinds of things that I think I can help him with. And our agreement has always been, I provide him with suggestions and edits, and then I never go back afterwards and read it again.
But you're really in it then. You're not. It's not like something he does away from you.
Exactly. So, yeah, I am involved in the stories. I understand what he's doing. He shares with me as he's writing, but he's careful because he also wants me to feel the surprise, the anticipation, the tension in anything that he's writing. So he gives me a chance to really experience it for the first time. And I've always said to him, I'm going to make suggestions, but it's yours. And so you take what you want, you leave the rest, and there's no feeling on my part, well, I gave you the suggestion, you didn't take it. Well, it's not my story. If I really want to, have something come out in that way, I'll write it. So we've developed a really good relationship that way, and I've realized because he does so much work in mystery, he's really affected the way that I read mysteries and I see television programs that are mysteries or thrillers. He's really sharpened my ability to be able to look at a book or look at a movie and sit back and fairly early on say, I think I know who did it. And he's given me that.
Well, maybe that ruined anything for you?
No, I think to me it's like solving a puzzle, so I think it's fun.
Cool. Well, Sharon, you are also married to an intense, concentrating sort of guy who, a tree might fall on him and he barely notices, like literally.
Literally, yeah.
How does it work out between you?
Drains the house twice. So, well, David, when we first met, was already working on, I think, like the second or third book, and he was in advertising with his parents for a while before he started writing. And he's always been a night writer. He always likes that quiet time at the end of the day is the good beginning of a work day for him. Mm-hmm. So when we first married, it was a little rough, but, you know, I told him, I said, you know, you were a writer when we met, you were a writer when we married, you know, I'm not going to make you change anything on account of that. Now, when the kids came along, we made a conscious decision that we were going to try really hard to always have family dinner as a family together. That's worked pretty well, except when I'm going through yet another surgery. I've had quite a few, and David has had to deal with that. And sometimes that takes him away from his writing, especially because, you know, he may be the parent who's driving during that time while I'm recuperating and not allowed to drive. So it's gotten easier now that the girls are older. They're driving. So that's...
Now, does David have an office that's outside of the house? I don't know, yes. But I get the impression it is, right?
For a while, he was writing in one of our spare bedrooms, and it wasn't quite as bad as what Larry and Bridget were dealing with, you know. But it was not necessarily quiet at night. Right after we got married, like within a year, he fell and broke his right wrist into about 57 pieces, and he had to have surgery on it and the whole thing. And during that time, he could not type at all, and it was killing him. He was going through withdrawal like other writers. You know, he could not write. So that's when he started using the voice-activated software, which was fine, except when he gets really angry with his software and his computer, and he starts getting a little vocal with it, and he gets a little loud, and, you know, then he's waking the kids up because he's screaming at his computer because he's had to correct the same word 14 times. So we had a little storage shed on the other side of the swimming pool, and I came up with the idea, why don't we turn it into a writing nook, you know, writer's office for you? And so we did that, and he likes to go out there, away from everybody, away from the dogs, away from the cats, away from the kids, and it's quiet. He doesn't have a phone out there. He does have his cell phone, but there's no landline. And he goes out there and he veggies. And sometimes you have to go and say, all right, you've been out here way too long. It's time for dinner. But I have a secret weapon. What I do is, he's also the cook. He's an excellent cook. And I use my secret weapon, which is the kids. He can tell me, no, I can't come in now. I'm in the middle of this. I've got to finish this section, this paragraph, this whatever. But he can't tell the kids that, you know. He can't tell the girls, no. You know, he might say, I'll be in 5 minutes, but they wait on him. So it's like, come on, Dad, we know this routine. So that's been a real godsend, is sending the kids out to him and saying, you know, Dad, you've been working too much. And now that he's getting a little older, he needs to take it easy, you know, easier than he has been in the past. He can't do the 23 hours on and sleep for 4 and then go back and do another 16. You know, like you said,
we might not get 5 books out of him every year now.
Exactly. You might not get 5 books out of him, but I think his quality is better than it was a couple of years ago, just because he is resting more. And so, might not have the quantity, but I think the quality is a lot better. So.
Yeah, well, if Uncompromising Honor, which comes out in October, by the way, is any testament to that, which it is, and it's great. Then
he's very, very proud of that one. So.
That's good.
And he's just finished, he's doing the final edit pass on the newest Safehold book, which we don't have a date for that release yet, but it'll be sometime next year. And he's really happy with it. So he's kind of fought this one a little bit. It didn't go gently into that good night. So he had to step back away from it for a couple of days and, you know, talk it through with me a little bit, what he wanted to accomplish. And I'm his sounding board. I think a lot of spouses are that. You know, he's got to work things through, and sometimes it's better if he talks to somebody about it while he's doing that. So And by the way, we're learning about Zeppelins right now, so I can't tell you how many U-boat Zeppelins. It's how many pounds, tons of zinc it's going to require to produce the gas to float Zeppelins. So there you go.
Author spouse has learned some interesting things, it seems.
Oh yeah, whether you want to or not.
That was part 1 of a 2-part interview. Part 2 will be available next time on the podcast. This is another entry in Alliance of Equals, a Liaden Universe novel by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller. Beset by the angry remnants of the Department of the Interior and challenged at every turn by opportunists on their new homeworld of Surebleak, and low on funds, Clan Corval desperately needs to reestablish its position as one of the top trading clans in known space. To this end, Master Trader Sharon Rice-Weber and Corval's premier trade ship Dutiful Passage is on a mission to establish new business associations and to build a strong primary route that links well with existing loops and secondary routes. But reestablishing trade and preserving the lives of the few remaining members of the clan aren't all of Corval's problem. Matters come to a head as Dutiful Passage, accustomed to being welcomed and feted at those ports on its call list, finds itself denied docking and blacklisting while agents of the DOI mount armed attacks on others of Corval's traders under the very eyes of port security systems. Traveling with Dutiful Trader on this unsettling journey is Patty Rice-Weber, the master trader's heir and his apprentice. Patty is eager to make up for time lost due to Corval's unpleasantness with the Department of the Interior, but she is also keeping a secret so intense that her coming of age and perhaps her very life is threatened by it. And here is the latest entry in Sharon Lee and Steve Miller's Alliance of Equals.
Chapter 32. The Garden of Gems, Langlast Port. "Welcome, Master Trader," Torona Rusk called from the back of the store. "Please join me here so that we may talk in comfort." The shop was not so brightly lit today, though the cases themselves blazed with light and color. Sean walked slowly toward the back and the waiting vendor, giving each case that he passed a searching glance. It was a thing traders learned, or they did not stay long at trade, to assess a sample case or a display shelf with a glance, on the alert for anomalies and items of interest. Thus far, though it was a perfectly adequate shop of its kind, nothing in the Garden of Gems caught his trained eye. Unless Master Rusk had something very interesting indeed back in her corner, this was destined to be a very short visit. One must be courteous, of course, but if there was nothing on offer that would fit the passage's mix, that was simply a fact of business. Ahead, the vendor waited, standing beyond a darkened case. He stepped forward, there being nothing to see, and cried out in agony as fire shot along his veins and his life boiled away. He crouched inside heel space, one knee and one fisted hand braced against the misty ground. His breath came in great sobs, his thoughts staggering and disordered. Pain, gods, the pain. "You left the pain behind you, child. Here now, let me help you stand." The voice. He raised his head and looked into a familiar, hawk-nosed face. Loot. His other self produced an edged smile. "There now. I knew your wits hadn't wandered far." Sean cast that aside with a toss of his head. "What just happened?" "You walked into a trap. Your henchman at the follow. I don't wish to concern you, but it would seem your case is dire. I am with you. What would you have me do?" Sean stared into the black eyes, which were as serious as ever he'd seen them. "If you are truly able to do anything in my time and space, protect my daughter. That trap was closed on one of us previously, and our enemy is without mercy. I will do what I may for the maiden, your daughter. Stand now, and gather what strength you may from this good place." Lute rose and held down one wiry hand. Sean took it and rose, distressed to find that he needed the aid. "Come to me now," Lute said, opening his arms. Sean likewise opened his arms, and they embraced. Strength rose in him, cold and implacable. The 1,000 cuts through which his life had bled out were healed, and he heard his blood singing in his veins. He saw the links to Patty, to Priscilla, as bars of living light, and Lute cradled him as sweetly as his mother had used to do. He sighed, drawing upon the virtue of heel space, then blinked as if woken from a dream. As Lute ended the embrace and stepped back, raising his hand to show the red counter, held between thumb and forefinger. "A token," Lute murmured, "so that the maiden will believe." He turned his head abruptly. "She comes," he said sharply. "Fare you well, child. I to the maiden." He was gone, faded away into the mists just before the mists themselves faded, and Sean opened his eyes into a blare of light. He was sitting in a chair. No, he corrected himself, glancing down. He was bound quite thoroughly into a chair. His back straight, his arms tight against the rests, his feet flat on the floor, knees wrapped with the chair legs. He could move his head, which he did at a slight sound from his left. Vanner Higgs sat, unbound, in a chair very similar to his. His blunt, lived-in face was utterly without expression. His eyes were open, but it was plain that he saw nothing. Sean extended his senses, seeing a tangle of black intent, twisted cunningly around the man's emotive pattern and around what might be his waking mind. "Splendid! You return," a woman's voice exclaimed from quite nearby. "How did you enjoy your first kiss from the Dramleys killer?" He turned his head to face Torona Rusk, his captor, sitting on the desk before him, leaning back on her hands and utterly at her ease. "Sadly, without finesse," he replied, keeping his voice calm. "I wonder why you have removed me from its embrace." "An excellent question." She smiled as if he were a particularly clever student. "While there are those of us who believe that it would satisfy our mission goal to simply deprive Corval of its master trader, Yosgalan of its Thodelm, and Valcon Yosfelium of his Charleket, others of us wish to conserve resources. I speak no flattery when I say that you are extremely powerful, doubly so for one who is merely Shah Dramlisa. As a teaching master myself, I find it possible to be critical of your teachers. They did not push you hard enough, merely, curiously, to the point where it suited you to have them give over, eh? Coming full Dramlisa would not have done for you at all, would it? A healer might yet pursue a life of trade, but a Dramlisa would have other calls upon his time and his nature. Power alone does not a Dramlisa make, Sean said, his inner sight on the dire tangle around Vanner's soul. The man had not moved. He had not blinked. He was utterly in thrall. And if that was the work of the woman before him— "True, very true," Torona Rusk said now, as if they were merely chatting over tea. "Proper training, however, may accomplish much with raw resource. Sometimes, you know, we masters must be a little cruel, in order to open our students to their fullest potential. You will understand presently. Do you intend to make me your student, then? As much as it must pain me to say it, I would prefer not." "You will change your mind in time," she said, with perfect good cheer. "Now, in a moment you will be tested. If you are not able to rise to the challenge, well, there is always the path favored by those of us who see harm to Corval as the greatest good we might accomplish. I will tell you, however, that I believe you will triumph in the testing." "Your faith in me is humbling," Sean murmured, "but I do not think that I am interested in participating in your test." "That is every student's choice," she said cordially. "Attend me now." She raised a hand and pointed at Vanner, sitting enthralled and motionless. "Here we have a subject. I shall influence him to an action, while you will seek to influence him to a different action. Thus we shall test your innate ability." Sean took a breath, trying to still the sudden fear. "He is not of Corval, and he is not of the Dramlees," he said reasonably. "You have no quarrel with him. Let him go." "Certainly he is no Dramleesa. Blind and dumb, this one, and so charmingly open to suggestion. Thus—" Sitting stiff in his chair, Vanner moved, slowly, while his face remained blank and his eyes remained sightless. He raised his right hand, reached beneath his jacket, and withdrew his gun.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of An Alliance of Equals by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com, to Baen intern Jonathan Graubaird for editing help, and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz.
And a raucous round of applause, huzzas, woos, and oh boys, plus fireworks, rocket ships, and a wish that nuclear fires of thanks, praise, and admiration warmed the cockles of their hearts to Emily Butler, Bridget Correia, Dan Hoyt, Maggie Nowakowska, Mona Pinette, and Sharon Rice-Weber, spouses of a whole host of Baen authors.
Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.